My name is Tylluan. I'm a solitary pagan witch. I'm an author and the founder of the Wolf and Howl Press. And today's little chat is going to be about witches and forgiveness. I meant to do this talk a very long time ago, and various things got in the way and it sort of got pushed to the back of the queue. So here it is today. Witches and forgiveness. Why should it matter? Well, one of the reasons I thought of doing this was because I had heard in an argument, well, you're a witch, you must forgive. What about any harm done? What about karma? What about this? What about that? Now, we've got to be very, very careful here not to go cherry picking. It's a bit like when people talk about karma. Karma is quite specific. You know, karma has, in Eastern religions, certain rules. You know, you do so-and-so, you're going to have to do 84 lives, beginning as a dung beetle or something, before you can reincarnate as a person, as a human being. It is very, very precise. It is no good going cherry picking, saying, oh, there we are, that's karma. No, it isn't. It isn't. It might be a just vengeance. It might be the universe getting its own back, but we've got to be very, very careful when we start talking about karma to understand what we mean. You see, this is one of the problems. We have paganism has exploded, if you like. It's always been there. But it has exploded into the open since about the last 45 years, something like that. It's really got going. Maybe a bit longer, but not an awful lot longer. Maybe 60 years at the absolute most. And of course, one of the problems is when things explode, they tend to go off in all directions. You can't exactly control where they're going. And I'm not saying anything is wrong, I'm just saying be careful, because when we're solitaries, if we start talking about, if I talk about karma and say someone else I know talks about it, we might be describing quite different things. And then we get people say, oh, and it harm none, do as you will, and all this sort of thing, so you've got to forgive. Well, actually, no, that is a complete non sequitur. It doesn't work, that doesn't follow. Firstly, because it is impossible to avoid harming absolutely anybody and anything. You know, it is. And secondly, because it's not what was meant by the original quotation. So again, it's a case of cherry picking. So when I talk about witches and forgiveness, I do get a little bit, annoyed is too strong a word, but I do get a bit niggled, if you like, thinking that when people say, oh yes, a real witch always forgives. You think, no, doesn't work like that. So what do I mean by forgiveness? What do I think are the main guidelines for forgiveness? There is only one person you have to begin by forgiving, and that is yourself. If you don't forgive yourself, you ultimately poison everything that comes after. Yeah, I used to work with a woman who, she always held these terrible, terrible grudges, especially against her partner. Every day just about we used to be regaled with new stories about what this man had done. And then she'd always finish up by saying, of course I forgave him, but I'm not going to forget it. And you're like, oh. I remember one day somebody working with us again said, well, look, I'm sorry, you're not forgiving him. You're really not. You were just keeping a grudge going. She said, that's not forgiveness. Now, leaving that aside, when I say we should forgive ourselves first, it's the hardest person to forgive. Why do we have to forgive ourselves? Well, we have to forgive ourselves because if we don't, it festers. It's not about forgiving the other person. You cannot forgive the other person until you have actually forgiven yourself for being taken in, for allowing yourself to be hurt, for being gullible perhaps, or naive, or for making the wrong decision. Now, we all make wrong decisions. We're all gullible sometimes. We're all naive. We all want to believe the best of people we love. And often they deserve it, and sometimes they don't. So when it goes wrong, before we can move on, the person to forgive is ourselves. Do that first. You have to literally take a bit of time out to say, well, yes, I was a bit gullible there. Yes, I did want to believe the best of that person and they let me down. Yes, I made a wrong call. I made the wrong decision. I won't do it again because I've learned from it. That's a very important part of forgiving yourself. You have to learn from whatever went before. And then from there, you can start on the path of deciding if you want to forgive somebody else, if you're able to forgive somebody else. You may not want to. I don't know. Don't know what they've done to you. Some things are very difficult indeed to forgive, especially if the person keeps doing them. But just heard the dog snoring, so I've paused a minute. Oh, can send me to sleep sometimes. Some things are hard to forgive. Some people are difficult to forgive because actually they're going to keep on doing the same thing. And if anybody says to you, well, I'm sorry if I've done such and such, I'm sorry if I've upset you, that's the usual one, I'm sorry if I've upset you, but. Now, a real apology doesn't have the but on the end. You know, I always think when you're in a hole, stop digging, I'm sorry. Why can't we just leave it at that? You get a chance to explain things later. But once somebody comes at me with, I'm sorry, but, I know it's not an apology at all. It's a justification. So really, as witches, we need to get away from this idea that somehow we are bound by Christian rules of forgiveness. And we need to move on from that. We need to be a little bit more grown up. Instead of forgiving all and sundry, we've got to try and forgive ourselves to start with. Otherwise, we don't go anywhere. And I hope you found it helpful. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.